live in just a second. There it is. Hey, everyone. It's live. Welcome to this webinar. I am Justin Garrison. I'm head of product at Sidera Labs. And thank you all for joining. This is going to be just a fun conversation all about Kubernetes Ingress Gateway API and all of your migration fun you're going to have over this December and maybe January or February season. So buckle up. It's a nice cold winter. And to get started, James, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is James Strong. I am a solutions architect for Isovalent at Cisco, I think is the terminology going now. We just got recently acquired by Cisco. So yeah. And I'm still a maintainer until March of Ingress NGINX.
And Ricardo, how about you?
Hey, how are you doing? So I'm Ricardo. I was the maintainer of Ingress NGINX from 2021 to 2024 or 5, I don't know. I work at Red Hat. I'm a software engineer today working on the All Gateway API stuff.
Yeah, thank you both for joining, because if you haven't heard, I mean, the big news is that the NGINX Ingress controller is going away, and it was very, very popular among the Kubernetes group just generally. When do you want to explain why was NGINX Ingress controller like the de facto Ingress controller?
You know, we've had that conversation a lot about it being the de facto and the standard, and it isn't. There isn't a standard or de facto. There is just happenstance where it happened to be one of the first out there. That's really how it came to be. Ricardo can probably talk a little bit more, but yeah, it's almost 10 years old, and it just happened to be one of the first ones out there and readily available, and it just continued to grow to what it is now. I usually, in most of my talks, we'll talk about like how complex it is to maintain and how many feature sets are available. But yeah, it's grown over time, and yeah, I just gonna continue to say it. It's not the de facto, it's not the standard. It's just available, and it's very easy to use, and people started using it, and it got part of the documentation, and just kind of went from there. Ricardo, you want to go add some more?
No, I think that's all that you say. Like Tim Hawking used a good example during the retirement talk, saying like Ingress NGINX existed before actually role-based access control existed on Kubernetes, right? I'm not so. It is not that it was de facto. It was created by Alejandro, by Manuel Alejandro, ALEDBF on GitHub. And because he wanted to get something that would replace Service Load Balancer. I'm not sure if you folks remember about Service Load Balancer, which is another retired project from Kubernetes, to reconcile Ingress API. So by the time there wasn't role-based access control, there wasn't controller runtime, there was just like bare Kubernetes libraries, and Alejandro wanted to implement that, and was probably the first. And then he decided to donate to Kubernetes, or more like an example controller, but because of like the easiness and you know, being the first, it became the mostly used. But we try to avoid saying that it is official, because it wasn't never official actually. Well,
it was officially supported, but it was not. It wasn't the only thing, right? The Ingress is a API spec, and anything can integrate it. And I think one of the beauties of the NGINX Ingress controller was the fact that a lot of people already knew NGINX, right? That was like just this familiarity of like, I know how this config looks, and so I can template that out, and then I can know how to manage NGINX in a programmatic way, essentially, right? It's like, instead of writing my own config files, Kubernetes wrote the config files, and all of the features that people didn't know NGINX had for a long time, like hot reload and things that, you know, back in the day before Kubernetes, like we were doing this, and we'd write a config file, and then we'd restart the service, and it would work. And all the NGINX Ingress controller was doing was essentially that for us, right? Template the config, run NGINX.
The power of that was also one of its downfalls. It's one of the things that we've talked about a lot while we were maintaining the project, is that we exposed too much of the NGINX config, and by allowing folks to do things like configuration snippets or just implementing something. Or I think the big downfall for us, I think from a security perspective, was allowing people to inject Lua scripts into it, because Nginx supported it, custom scripts. Anytime you allow an end user to run arbitrary code, you're gonna have security issues, and we dealt with those a lot.
Yeah. You also pointed out that it was in the documentation, which I think is just one of those things that is super powerful that people underestimate. It's just the power of documentation of the defaults in the docs is generally what's going to be used, right? Like just by the majority of people, like, oh, this is the thing that I copy and pasted. This is what I'm familiar with already. I already knew Nginx. Now I'm just going to keep rolling with it. And then when they are familiar with it, they're like, oh, I know it can do this other thing, so I'm going to try to force it in there to make it do something the old way, right? Or however it is that they wanted to do it before. So the deprecation is mainly due to maintenance and security, right? James, you want to talk more about that?
I talked for this for 2 weeks, a week prior to KubeCon, and every conversation I had at KubeCon Atlanta was about this. So to go back, like Ricardo said in his intro, he was helping us maintain it from a code perspective. We really split our duties. There's about 4 or 5 of us at a height. 3 or 4 were mostly, about 3 were half-time. They would help do some things here and there, help with triaging issues. But really, when we split our duties, I saw myself more like a product manager and a release engineer. I think most of the code I ever wrote was helping speed up the release process. And Ricardo did a lot of the software development, like fixing bugs, implementing features from that perspective. And it got to a point where, I'll let Ricardo talk about his experience with maintaining the project, but it got to a point where it was not something, again, that I was being paid for. It was taking up time away from other things that I wanted to do. And after the Ingress nightmare that it was called, it was a nightmare. It just kind of made me reflect on that. Maybe I need to take a step back from open source work. And, a lot of other things was happening in my life. So it was just one of those things where I just didn't have the time, the energy to be able to commit to the project. So I had to step back. We've had, Ricardo, he can talk about his, but we've had other people come in and implement a feature, stay on for a little bit, maybe do a release, but no one really maintaining the project after that. We had Marco from Giant Swarm. He came in to help because Giant Swarm uses this as a service, and he came in to help from a maintainer's perspective as well. So that gave us probably about another year or so. But when I started stepping back with the idea of like working on Ingate, it was just that kind of revelation where it's just like, I need to take a break from open source for my mental health and for the health of my other relationships in my life. So I just kind of had to step back from that. So it was just difficult to do, but it was something that had to be done. So once that happened, it was left on Marco to maintain, and it's not for one person to maintain this project. I think it's 20,000 stars on GitHub, about 8,000 forks, like hundreds of probably thousands of people use it. So it's just like he got to a point where it was just too much for him, and things weren't getting fixed, things weren't getting taken care of, and it was a long and hard conversation with SIG network leadership, with the Security Response Council from the Kubernetes team, that it's time. We've been trying to get maintainers and contributors, and no one is stepping up. And unfortunately, just it was the life of the project. It was just time. So Ricardo, I'll leave it to you to talk about your experience with maintaining such a large project.
Yeah. So just making something clear, like I have joined Red Hat 5 months ago. So now I am fully focused on upstream, right? So, but I wasn't an Ingress NGINX maintainer anymore when I joined Red Hat. So before Red Hat, what happened, even before the other companies, right? So in 2020, 2021, I guess it was during pandemics, Alejandro decided to step down because he's been maintaining the project for a long time, and he sent a message on the signature mailing list saying like, "Hey, I'm stepping down. If someone wants to step up and help me on that," and I had this kind of passion, or this relationship with Ingress NGINX. Was the first open source project that I have contributed on Kubernetes. We used that on my previous job as like our Ingress controller for some long time. And I was like, okay, maybe I can start helping this project, right? So I'm not a developer. James keeps saying like Ricardo was doing the code, but at that time I've been mostly on the infrastructure side, the service side. I wasn't never a professional developer before, right? So when James says Ricardo was coding, actually Ricardo was the one to blame about the CVEs, because the release manager didn't add the CVEs, but Ricardo did. Just kidding. But so what happened was like I decided to step up. Was kind of like nice during even the pandemics, trying to help. But at some point, what happened was that I was doing those things during Sunday, because nothing on open source on my previous and the previous of my previous company, they were part of my day work. Like I had other things to do. I didn't have time to deal with like, Ingress NGINX. We didn't use it, Ingress NGINX on my other work, right? So I was doing that on Sunday. And at some point, I was, as James, super tired. Like my wife came to me during Sunday and say like, hey, are you gonna really keep spending your sunny, beautiful Brazilian Sunday? Like it's sunny outside, we can go to the swimming pool, we can travel, we can do something, and you are just gonna spend your time doing open source and other things. I was like, yeah, it's fun for me. Like I like that. I am evolving myself with that. But I think that at some point it wasn't being fun anymore, So it was super stressful. People asking things, but never helping us. Me and James being, every Sunday trying to do releases, fix bugs, fix vulnerabilities. People pinging us, like pinging me during, my weekday and asking if I could solve something by like 11 p.m. my time. So the fact is like not having more maintainers actually ended up burning me out, and then ended up burning James out, and I think that's something that we need to speak on open source. Like I keep telling people, like, you need to be nice with your maintainers. You need to be, helpful with your maintainers, and not just like ask for things and say like, okay, you don't want to do whatever I want, So that's in the end, that's what happened. I think with the three of us, right? Like, because in the end, Marco was also super stressed and tired, right?
Yeah, he wasn't having fun either. I think a big thing that I found out at KubeCon Atlanta was, and it was just kind of became apparent, is like there's a huge human element to open source work, and sometimes it's not like there's still a human on the other end of that GitHub issue or that that comment that you're making, and it's just it was one of those things where I tried to poke my head back into the work, and I tried to answer a question, and the person wasn't downright mean or anything like that. They were just a little snarky, and they didn't like the answer I provided. And I was just like, no, not right now. Maybe I'll take a break. My day job still is working with Kubernetes, but whether it's funny or not, like customers get paid to yell at me, but people can't yell at me when I'm doing things in my free time. So it's one of those things. But like a lot of the maintainers, like at the maintainer summit and just throughout the week, just kind of helped reiterate that they were just having those conversations with me. Like they weren't asking about like, what am I going to do? Like, what's going to happen? They were like, how are you? Like, and just talking me through a lot of those things where it's just like, this is, it's, I don't know if folks have watched the KubeCon talk or were at the KubeCon talk. It was a difficult conversation to have with folks, like all throughout the week, and just like understand like it's okay to let things go.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a part of that is just a big expectation of like this free software that I've been using for such a long time should always be free. and I don't need to invest my time in fixing the bugs. I should just get this free software that exists, right? Because community and foundations and whatnot take care of the stuff that I don't want to deal with, and I don't have to pay for it. And there's expectations that often need to be reset there. And I want to actually just like, I'll jump our conversation a little bit here to a question here in the most, like, what's going to happen next, right? Like NGINX Ingress controller is going away. Is Gateway API going to all of a sudden have paid maintainers? Are the other implementations of Ingress that still exist, that are still available today, are those paid? How are those going to avoid the same fate?
So avoiding the same fate is interesting. I can't talk for how others maintain their projects, but I know the difficulty. But right now, like, one of the things we want to make sure that is clear is like Ingress, the API, isn't going away. Like SIG Network has never talked about that. It will always be available. It's just not getting new features. And the conversation is migrating to Gateway API. There's a couple things from this perspective, right? There's still lots of Ingress controllers that are out there. Folks will have to make the decisions for themselves if they want to continue using something that's not going to get new features. If they want to use advanced functionality, they should migrate to Gateway API. And there is in the Kubernetes SIG a project called Ingress to Gateway that will help you give an idea of what it looks like to do that migration. So you can feed it if it supports it. So that's the other thing. Ingress to Gateway is also an open source project. If it has providers and if it's supported, it will give you an idea of what your Gateway API specs would look like. Thank you, whoever posted that from Sodero. So you'll help with the migration. So that's the thing where that was part of the idea that we were going to have. Again, I'm probably bouncing around a little bit, but the idea too was for us, we were actually going to archive Ingress NGINX. There was a plan in place. We talked about it at KubeCons, and the idea was that we would migrate and help folks migrate to Ingate, which Ingate was supposed to be the Gateway API implementation that we could use to help folks migrate from Ingress NGINX. The problem with that is the same thing as like when we split time, Marco was doing the maintenance. I was supposed to be doing the development to implement Ingate, and it was the same thing. Just life gets in the way. Yeah. So there are Gateway API implementations out there. Once it came out, like a lot of folks came out there's Traffic. There's always the Cilium Gateway API implementation, Envoy Gateway. So there's lots of choices out there. And so folks will have to do the migration work to understand like what is it going to take to do that migration.
I think one of the things that is being discussed about Ingress that it's that would be probably solved with Gateway API. It's that the majority of features of Ingress, they are implemented using annotations, right? Yeah. So the problem is like, it's not just about moving away from Ingress, one Ingress controller to the other. It's just like Traffic, as an example, they say like they did some portability for Ingress annotations, but it's not just move from one to the other, which is something that we are trying to solve on Gateway API, because Gateway API is a strict, strong API with conformance that if you say that you support something that it's defined on the API, if you are implementation like Cilium, Istio, Envoy Gateway, any of them, right? You need to provide a conformance report saying that that feature that you say that you support, you really support. So I think someone asked if like Gateway API is going to be paid. I would like to give that answer in the sense that like the development of Gateway API, the API specification, it's kind of being paid by the companies that want to implement a Gateway specification. Like Red Hat put me to work on Gateway API specification. I know that Isovalent puts Nick to work on the Gateway API specification, and then each implementation will support their own Gateway API. And if you decide to move, let's say, from Istio to Envoy Gateway or to Cilium, you should be able to do that with a much lower effort than moving from Ingress because the API is stronger, right? So now that's up to you to say like, okay, I want to pay for support for one implementation. So you can do that, or you can start without something and then move to one that you want to pay, right?
Yeah, the thing you bring up here is something I wanted to talk about, where it's like the reason you can't just move from one Ingress controller to another one seamlessly is because of those annotations. And those annotations exist for a reason, because network handling in applications is difficult. And the API spec should not have every option for how people want to route things and how that controller on the back end wants to handle it. So in order to make the API, the actual contract of Ingress, small, we just overloaded annotations and said, you can throw anything you want in annotations, and controllers can have access to that data as a config and then implement it however they want. But annotations are not part of the API. They are extra things, which is usually where a lot of these features happen, right? Like there's like, hey, I can route just layer 7 HTTP traffic, but then once you forward it somewhere, you're like, oh, I need to handle posts different than something else, or I need to route, like all of that stuff becomes an issue. I actually found my first open issue on, actually my only open issue on Ingress NGINX controller, which was from 2017. So I found this from 8 years ago, that I was using this at a company, and there was a bug that I'm like, oh, hey, this doesn't work. And the answer to this was like, oh, we have an annotation for that now, right? Like, here's how we can solve your problem, because the Ingress controller can't change the spec upstream. Like, that process is intentionally slow so that it can be supported long term, but that it's also very small so that a lot of things can implement it. Annotations are just how we got around that sort of limitation, and that is exactly why migrations are difficult today. And
they are kind of the root cause of some CVEs as well.
Absolutely.
Because when you accept some arbitrary things, annotations, they are just arbitrary. In the end, they can become an NGINX configuration, and that's how those things, they started to happen. Some of them.
Yes, some of them. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's you need to look at what's available in the landscape and make a decision based on your needs, your features, things like that. And one of the ideas, and I don't think we've published it yet, it's going to be an addendum to the blog, is that we were looking at a lot of the functionality when we were doing the in-gate migration conversation. We were looking at all of the annotations and the configuration options of Ingress NGINX and seeing what's available in Gateway at the time. It was 1.2. We're up to now 1.4. So we need to do a revamp of that and give that to folks. So it's like you can say, yes, this is now supported. This annotation is supported in 1.4. We also, as part of this, we did a survey to try to understand like what features people use. Yeah. We also have that data available. I've given it in the Slack channel, in the Kubernetes Slack channel. But we need to update that to 1.4 so that it helps give people an idea of like what's available or how difficult the migration is going to be.
Yeah, and I like, you bring up just another point of, this is open source software, and no one tells us how they're using it. This is a thing that like we don't know if you relied on a feature or some implementation detail on like trying to get people to say, hey, this is something that we need to move off of, and we have no clue who's using it where, how large, how small, any of that is.
Hey, Ricardo, how many people did you upset when you deprecate features? We've done this so many times. We've had this discussion. It's like we don't know who is using things, and it's just like this is old arbitrary code, or this is a feature that is difficult. Like, and we deprecate things, and it upsets folks.
And the fun thing was like, wasn't like small folks, like when you are curious and you see like who is yelling at you, and you go to GitHub and you see the company that the person works, right? And you see like, oh, so this is like a bad deprecation for them, like so. Yeah. Some give you an example, some flight tracker sites, random, not one or the other, or like some sports companies. So you see and say like, like, so you don't know the size of things. And that's one of the things that we started to figure out as well, like how impactful Ingress NGINX was on those bigger clusters, right? So that was a lot of responsibility as well.
I just pulled it from one of our talks just to give folks an idea of like, there's 118 annotations and 186 configuration options.
Jeez.
And so that's one of the things that, we went through all those 118 annotations. We're like, what's supported, what's not. And I can probably find I'm afraid to pull up Slack while I'm here. We can post that and share that, but it's just, it's one of those things where it's like, we're not again, we're not going away until March. Like we're trying to help folks through this, but it's again, it wasn't an easy discussion. Like there was a lot of back and forth when we were talking about the deprecation date. Like there were some folks who wanted us to do it that week in Atlanta, like deprecated then.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And we were pushing for, I think we pushed for about a year. So we were able to reconcile and get, the 4 months available to it. So
I frequently tell people that templating out a config file is more complex than just writing the config file, right? Like if you know the settings you want, like writing a file is going to be hard to learn initially, but so many people don't want to have to learn it. And so they template it, and then you have if statements, and then you start getting Turing complete Jinja back in the day, but then, go templating everything else. And it becomes so much more difficult. And then you abstract that templating into some API spec, and like you're mirroring, you're trying to like map these things in and generate at the end of the day a config file.
That's
and
it just is, yeah.
And it's not purpose built for it, right? And so like when you really think about it, it is so difficult to get this stuff, and there's so much complexity involved in that whole process that I don't even think a lot of people realize that like NGINX, the controller, like you're still building from the source, right? Because licensing and everything else on NGINX and F5 acquisition and other things happened around NGINX that's made it so you couldn't just use an off-the-shelf NGINX.
Yeah, there was talk about a year and a half ago of just trying to use stock. But the problem is, because of the features that we support, we needed to build in those custom modules to support that. And then also the Lua support, we have to build all of those from scratch too. So the build process, I think we timed it. It's about 4 hours just to build the controller and get it out there. That's not all of the other work that takes into time to get it done. Yeah, there's the templating.
Yeah. Go look at the template, please. And then just like someone else say like, how would you ever modify this and not break someone? It gets absolutely ridiculous.
That was also one of the things that we were looked at with this conversation around the migration or the deprecation is there something that we can do to help folks along with the templating? And it's just wasn't possible without introducing regressions. And again, we've talked about it. We don't have the time to fix the issues we currently have. If we try to do something drastic, like changing our templating engine, which Ricardo tried, it's not easy.
Yeah. We're about halfway through, and I want to ask, there's a bunch of people here, which is great. Thanks everyone for leaving comments and interacting. Let us know what you're looking at moving to. Are you going to another Ingress controller? Are you moving to Gateway? Are you shifting your resources? And then I also want to discuss like how is Gateway different for folks? What problem is it solving differently than what Ingress was doing?
I was going to leave that to the Gateway API maintainer now. He gets paid to answer these questions.
Thank you. Okay, so I think Gateway API is a much more complete API in the sense of features, right? So not comparing to how Ingress does things, but in the sense like you have now 3 different personas at least. Like you separate your application developer, who is responsible just to establishing routes, from the gateway admin, who usually is the person responsible for costs, because when you create a gateway and you create a load balancer, you have costs on your cloud provider, right? What we've been trying to do on Gateway API, it's not accept everything. So we do have a well-established process where we get new features, we discuss those features, very similar to the way that we discuss features on Kubernetes, but on a smaller, short time, and on a way that implementations, they can come and say like, okay, this does make sense, I will be able to implement that. Or like you are asking me something that it's very specific, like you are trying to implement some mod security thing. Mod security just makes sense on NGINX, doesn't make sense on Envoy. Giving an example that may not be real, but so it's this is what we've been trying to do, right? Thanks, James. You keep posting those things. Thank you. So what our intent and my intent specifically, it's like to first make the adoption of Gateway API easier, right? Coming from Ingress, I know that Ingress, it's really, really easy to get started. While on Gateway API, you do have to create a class, you do have to create a gateway, you do need to understand a new API. Certificate attaching from a user perspective, it's not possible. So I am a developer and I want to have my own certificate. I need today to have my gateway admin to actually add the certificate. So the workflow is different, right? And that's one of the questions that I've mostly answered on Reddit when Ingress NGINX was, announced to retire. Was like, yeah, but I have this problem, and I was every time saying like, hey, take a look into listener set, take a look into listener set. And in fact, like other maintainers, they say like, yeah, probably we need to create a frequently asked question for that. So that's what we've been trying to do. And one thing really important for Gateway API, it's for real, it's like this conformance concept, right? Because we don't want to have, again, the same problem that if you decide to move from Istio to Cilium, you need to re-implement all of your APIs, or you have breaking chains. They need to behave the same way, right? So it's right now, if you like better HA proxy than NGINX, you should be able just to move from one to the other without having to put a bunch of annotations. That's mostly what we've been at least looking for. We are trying, after the Ingress NGINX retirement, we understood that there is a really big need of implementing those features that are missing, mostly listener set and some pass-through and other things. So we got a lot of engagement from the community and the companies implementing that to try to move that. Probably next release will be packed with a lot of new features.
I actually have customers in my day job that are using Ingress NGINX, and we've been having this conversation about what do we do now from a migration perspective. So yeah, it's a very large issue, and like I said, I want to continue to reiterate, this decision wasn't made very lightly.
Yeah, they should yell at you, right? I think that's what you are paid for.
No one's yelled at me.
Okay. Just kidding.
Does the architecture of the Gateway API, like settings and in the way that it separates some of the concerns, does that mitigate any of the security concerns going forward of a single controller that does everything for L7 traffic versus having like certificates be a separate persona inside the cluster?
Okay. Do you want me to answer that one as well, James?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay. So yes and no. In the security matter, when you have a well-established API instead of annotations, you know that a numeric field should be a numeric field, right? So if you try to add line breaks, or if you try to add something that it's like trying to escape some string, it's not going to be possible because the API is strong, right? So a Boolean is a Boolean, a path is a path, and they have stronger validations. And we can add those stronger validations today on Kubernetes using cell rules, validating admission policy, which didn't exist back on time on Ingress as well, right?
You don't like validating things with regex?
Oh yeah, I love them. I've spent a lot of weekends writing regex. Thank you, James. You're getting me.
No, that's one of the big. That is one of the big advantages of Gateway API over things like the Ingress NGINX implementation. Is a lot of the issues is like we're trying to fix some of these things with regex because they're not strongly typed. They're just strings. And if anybody, the old adage, if you're trying to solve a problem with regex, you now have two problems. Well, multiply that out by 118. So.
Yeah. And sorry, I was just going to say that the no on the meaning of this security, it's because mostly now it still depends on how your implementation does things, right? So eventually Gateway API doesn't support some feature, and some implementation decides to extend that using some CRD or using some other way. And that CRD will eventually have security issues that will call CVEs on them as well. But I think it's mostly, related to the same problem that we had on Ingress. Like the API spec doesn't support, so I will try to do my way, and eventually my way of implementing that for my own solution will bring vulnerabilities as well.
Sure. I mean, it turns out that anyone can write vulnerable code throughout the stack, But the fact that this is usually public facing or customer facing or internet facing as like the entry point into your workloads makes it a little more critical that when a CVE rated 10 comes out for Ingress, that is typically a little more important than something that's on the back end that no one else external has access to, or people can't just curl an endpoint or something like that.
Yeah, that's
hopefully. Hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's always been like the concern when we have these configurations that we do, is that it's, this is the entry point to a lot of things. And it's, it was aptly named when it said Ingress Nightmare, because when we realized that you could have remote code execution on a thing that's public internet facing, it's pretty serious. So.
Yeah.
And you can make it worse exposing your Kubernetes API server using Ingress. Imagine you create an Ingress to point to your API server.
Why not? It seems like a good idea. You briefly mentioned Ingress being used as like a cost reduction, especially for cloud environments where load balancers cost money, right? Like where a lot of times the pattern was instead of exposing every service in Kubernetes as a load balancer service, the idea was only a few of them that needed load balancer direct features would do it that way, and everything else that was L7 traffic would go through a single ingress in a cluster and have one load balancer. So you reduce your costs. Does Gateway API, is it using the same sort of architecture, the same use cases would apply for Gateway API controllers and exposing services?
Yeah, you can. So the theory, it's like you can deploy multiple gateways if you want, or you can deploy a single gateway on an infrastructure namespace as an example, right? And deploying that gateway will deploy a load balancer for that, but just for that gateway. And then you can tell that gateway that you accept routes being attached from any namespaces or from namespaces that has a specific label, right? So an application developer, when it's creating the HTTP route, the application developer will say like, okay, I want to attach to this gateway, right? Instead of needing to create a new gateway. So we can say that the creation of a gateway is related to the creation of a load balancer. So you can create a single gateway and allow anyone to attach the routes to that gateway.
Now, does it also, because Gateway API handles more types of traffic than just Ingress, so it can do other things like gRPC and things that maybe couldn't do in Ingress, does that also mean that I can have less services, Kubernetes services, exposed directly as load balancers that now go through a Gateway API?
Yeah, you can. So one of the better examples on that on Ingress NGINX was like, we supported TCP and UDP routing, right?
That's great.
On Ingress was like a very bad idea. But Gateway API also has TCP and UDP routes. But the idea is like the gateway admin will say like, I do accept TCP or UDP, so I create this this listener. By the way, those APIs, they are not stable, so you shouldn't be using them in production anyway. But you can create listeners of TCP and UDP, and then you can say like, okay, so the users on those namespaces, they can create a TCP route or a UDP route and attach this listener, right? So now the traffic can be routed through this single gateway as well. And yeah, we do have other, so gRPC routes, HTTP routes. On 1.5, we are planning about TLS routes, which was a big use case that we had on Ingress NGINX because of TLS pass-through, using SNI to route.
So is that router actually looking at the SNI and then routing it to the right place?
When you use TLS route, yes. So the idea would be that you can enable a port or a host name to be SNI ready, and then allow pass-through using the host name as the matcher for the traffic.
Yeah. What about FTP? We're gonna get FTP. We actually we had a feature request for supporting FTP on Ingress NGINX.
Hold on, let me just remove James from the stream real quick, and then
thank you. I appreciate that.
I know
it's wild. I think there was one person who was trying to use SSH, like they were trying to front Ingress NGINX with SSH, and I was like, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah. Well, and if, for anyone, I wonder actually, Talos is a gRPC API. Like technically, that is like 100% supported through this chain of I can just have a gateway endpoint that routes to my Talos APIs, right?
You can. You can try and let us know worst case you can yell at me as James keep doing for like the last 4 years.
So people have until March, until deprecation actually happens. That means you're still supporting it. You're still getting CVE fixes in.
I literally did a release approval this morning.
There you go.
So there'll be so we're planning on still putting out patch releases for January and February as well.
And so in deprecation, doesn't like people should have a plan to move off, but also like the images aren't going away. We're not doing what Bitnami or other projects in this space have been doing by pulling images or blocking registry access. It's still going to be
something interesting. I don't know if folks know this about the Kubernetes registry. You can't delete images. It will not let you.
Oh, it's a push only.
It's a push only. Yeah. So I've actually done this myself, is that I've pushed bad images before because it's just a PR into a repo with automation and you can't delete it. We had to do a whole nother release cycle to get a new patch release out. So yeah, anyway, they won't be going away. The images will still be available. But as we all know, as time passes, new Go versions come out, new NGINX versions come out.
There was a Go CVE that dropped this week. So there's always things that are happening.
Yeah.
What do you recommend as the plan from December to March for people? Is it find another Ingress controller? Is it do Ingress to Gateway? Is it turn off the internet and just go on a vacation and stop all this madness?
That last one. It's Christmas. No. I think the biggest thing that we tell folks, and this is how I ended a lot of our Ingress NGINX talks at KubeCon, is contribute, get involved. Like if you have a need for a feature or something isn't available in the next one, go to the Gateway API meetings and speak up, contribute time, contribute, testing. I think that was one of our biggest things too, from an Ingress NGINX perspective, is that, folks would ask us an issue on AWS or on the Oracle Cloud or things that, we just didn't have access to because it was all freely supported in our, in our free time. So it's like we'd always solicit folks to go test features or go test something for us. I think that was probably one of the biggest things around the S390X deprecation that we did. So we just had no way to test it. So get involved with the community, join the Gateway API community meetings. They have them twice a week for different time zones. You can also join the, Cilium has their meetings. I'm sure Traffic has open source community meetings. Like they all have community meetings where you can go get involved in like, hey, I am responsible for this. I need to do this migration and I need to do it as soon as possible.
I would also recommend, if you're doing that, tell your manager that you're doing it on company time, because that was one of my problems early on when my manager did not approve of me doing Kubernetes involvements in community. So it was on me. And then that burnout happens when you're like, I want to be involved with this. I need to do things, but also it's maybe for work. Some of it's a little just personal. I'm interested, but also I have something I need to do and I get paid for. Let your manager know, let the chain know that, hey, we need to be supporting this for our time of actual development, of testing. These are important things that do help business values. And it's not just on an individual, because when that individual leaves the company, they have completely different responsibilities. No one takes over. All of that stuff becomes an issue if your leadership doesn't know.
I think that's one of the big things that, folks don't talk about a lot, is like, what is the impact of the open source that you're using? What happens when it goes away? And I think this is a prime example of that. Like, there's just this 4 or 5 folks for a very long time. It was one person at the onset that supported this. And it always surprised me that people were surprised by that fact, because they would come up to me after a KubeCon talk and they would be like, there's only 2 of you, like at the time. And I'm like, yeah. Like, so it's you got to tie it back to business value and business impact. Like, I have to do this. I have to be involved because we rely on it. I think that's going to be the biggest driving factor for people being able to contribute to open source and continue to help. Or get hired at Red Hat, like Ricardo did.
Yeah.
One question I did see from chat here is there anything that Ingress can do that Gateway API can't? I mean, besides the rampant CVEs, is that?
I'm gonna drop myself out of chat.
So I would say that if you are speaking specifically just about the Ingress object without any annotation, no, Gateway API can do everything. Now, if you are seeing things that are today implementation specific, so giving an example, session affinity, right? You need Ingress to select always the same backend based on a cookie or on a header. Today, this is not supported. There is a discussion ongoing on that, how to make this session affinity on the backends, but it's one of the features that are not supported. And there are plenty of them that are supported because of Ingress. Again, remember, like things that are annotations, they are not part of the specification of Ingress. They are Ingress NGINX specific. So speaking about Ingress NGINX specific, that there are a lot of things that Ingress NGINX can do that Gateway API cannot do yet. And some Gateway API will never do because they don't make sense for the Gateway API specification, while others, like session affinity, which is being discussed, eventually they will be supported by the API specification.
Okay.
And that's the feedback that we need, is that if folks are using something that's in an Ingress controller and they need that functionality in Gateway, if it's not in the spec or if it's not in an extension, folks need to know that. They need to hear about it. So that's why it's like open an issue, talk about it, like, hey, I tried this doesn't work, or this isn't supported. But do it respectfully and do it with, help, and, be kind about it. But we've already talked about it previously in the stream, is that you just don't know what folks are needing or what folks use, or it's another XKCD comic.
Yeah. And another question here I saw that was good, because a lot of these manifests aren't what people don't write them, right? We're using Helm charts that we have to wait for someone else to provide support for Gateway API so that we can migrate to it. How do we recommend people go about that? I mean, is that it's just always go to the source, whoever wrote it, and say, please support this? Is that you have to run it side by side? What should they do?
I mean, I did answer it in the chat, but again, it's one of those things where it's like, it's not going away, but you really shouldn't be using it, kind of thing. Like, go talk to those providers of those Helm charts and ask them, what are their plans? Like, look at their open issues, like try to figure out what their roadmap is. Like, are they going to support Gateway API? I'm sure Ricardo has a thought, but it's like, again, it's just, we don't know.
No, I think the majority of the problems that have been seen on those migrations, they are first, Gateway API is not a core API on Ingress, right? On Kubernetes, right? So we install a Kubernetes cluster and they don't come with the Gateway API CRDs, while Ingress is, right? The second one, it's Helm charts. Like people say, like, my Helm chart already has Ingress, but doesn't has Gateway API. So it's good to approach the maintainers, again, in a respectful way, on the health of the Helm charts. And even you can do the tests yourself with your Helm charts and maybe do a contribution saying like, hey, now I have this new value on my Helm chart that when I do Gateway API equals to true, it will deploy a Gateway API HTTP route instead of an Ingress resource. But those are the bigger problems that have been seen so far.
Yeah. And I mean, I usually recommend just install it first. Like, just try it, right? Like, there's a lot of people don't even, the CRDs aren't there, they don't have a controller. So start as small as possible. Start with something, I'm just routing vanilla, HTTP traffic with no affinity, all that sort of stuff. Make it as easy as possible for you to understand what's going on.
I would also say go talk to your platform teams. Like, most companies nowadays have teams that are running these developer platforms for deploying Kubernetes, and just go ask them, what are they doing? What are they planning on supporting Gateway API? And again, just to, it sounds wrong to say it, but like, force the issue. Like, just start having the conversation and try to, again, like we've already said, tie it back to the business value. It's like, hey, this thing's going away, or hey, we need to support this. I'm sure the platform teams are already aware of it. They're the people whose jobs we're making difficult with this. But again, it's got to come from all directions and all folks. But yeah, try it. Look at. I think that's why we asked the question, to try to understand what features folks were using on Ingress NGINX from a broad perspective, and then say, oh, hey, I forget what the number was. It's in the talk, like 30 or 40% of it was already covered in the Gateway API, or up to about 50% of it was going to be covered in the new version. So it's like, there's platform teams out there that just allow folks to run Ingress NGINX who maybe don't know what they're running or what features that they're using. So again, provide that information to the folks who are running your platforms so that they can make informed decisions when they're doing the migration conversations.
And realize that all of these people have their own deadlines and their own priorities and their own things that they're working on. So giving them enough heads up to say, hey, here's a new deadline for something, right? Because things don't get done unless they have deadlines or interest. You can't just like force something to happen if no one's going to pay attention to it. So you have to bring that up and say, something's going to happen here. Again, the NGINX control is not going away, but come April, June, if you're still out there running, Ingress NGINX, that is your own risk. You have to take responsibility for that, for something that is probably publicly facing on the internet that isn't getting, bug fixes or CVE patches. And that is on the companies and people doing it.
I mean, there's also companies out there too. I think SUSE is one of them, who is going to continue to support it for 2 years on their own platform for their paid customers. I'm sure there's other folks, other companies out there. I haven't seen any others. I mean, SUSE is the big one. There's talks with other companies who provide secure container images if they could continue to support it themselves. So there are options. There's conversations out there, and the thing that we talked about a little bit was, what about an authoritative fork? Like, if someone wants to do that, they can, but good luck.
I think someone forked it actually.
I mean, yeah, there's eight. Yeah, I think
there's plenty of forks.
Yeah, there's plenty of forks.
Yeah.
But it's understanding what it takes to maintain that and going from there. Like building software that you don't maintain from source is not fun. I remember putting in an issue on one of the Lua modules that we were using. We're like, hey, this thing's broken, and we're trying to upgrade. And it's again maintainer to maintainer. They eventually fixed it, and then we were able to integrate it. But it's not a uncomplicated piece of software.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, what is the patches? Is that end of March? Is that March 1st? Is that do you have a patch planned for March for whatever's?
We again, open source, and like we usually shoot for a patch release in that month. So we don't generally have plans, like when we say we're going to do it like March 15th, like we'll put our final patch release out in March. It will probably be at KubeCon EU, if any of my talks get accepted.
Which is the end of March.
So the end of March. So we'll probably plan to have something for the end of March at the KubeCon talk. Yeah. To be the final release. So we'll have a going away party in Amsterdam for Ingress NGINX.
The egress party.
Yeah.
One last question here. Why does Gateway API avoid some of these things and leave a lot of that specification off to implementation? Like, why are the vendors supporting it?
I'm going to leave that to our Gateway API maintainer. Also, I have a Gateway implementation too. So,
because some of those features, they just make sense on a specific type of backend or a specific implementation, right? So let me give you an example that we are facing today. One of the feature requests that I've been seeing downstream, I mean, like on Red Hat product and other thing, even on upstream, it's like, I want to customize the amount of replicas that my gateway deploys, right? So when I create a gateway, I want to say how many pods they will be created, right? Makes sense. It's easy, right? It's a real feature. How would a cloud provider implement that, right? So let's say Google Cloud, they have their own Gateway API implementation, which is not scalable. It's just like you deploy a gateway and something will be created in the cloud, will be a load balancer, will be a proxy, doesn't matter, right? So some of those things, they don't make sense, or they cannot be implemented by the implementation, right? Some things, they are really specific about, like, let's say Envoy. So I keep making jokes that like Gateway API is just like another Envoy implementation. Like everything is Envoy, everything is Envoy. It's rare to see some other implementation on a different technology. Still, if I want to implement something that it's just Envoy specific, it's not agnostic anymore, right? So I cannot just, get my APIs that were created on my cluster, and if I decide to move to another implementation because my current Gateway API implementation decided to retire, as we did in Ingress NGINX, it's going to be, again, a trauma, right? It's not going to be easy just to move from one to the other. So some of the features, they just don't make sense. They are not generic enough to say like they are part of the API. They are very, very specific to an implementation.
I just laughed because while we were doing the in-gate discussion, architecture discussion, Ricardo really wanted me to do Envoy.
Yeah, that's true.
And I was like, no, there's already enough Envoy out there in the world.
I want everything to be on Rust.
Where should people ask follow-up questions? They watch the stream, there's, asynchronously or whatever, like where should they get involved to say like, hey, I still have a question about something that is implemented? Is that the Kubernetes Slack? Is that Reddit? Is that throw it out in the void of social media? Where are people asking?
Yeah, Kubernetes Slack would probably be the best place because we still hang out there. There's still the Ingress NGINX channel. There is always the community meetings that's on the Kubernetes calendar, I'm sure. If you Google Kubernetes community calendar, it's there, so you can join the Gateway API meetings. But yeah, Kubernetes Slack is probably your best bet. I'm sure there is a Gateway API specific channel, so get in there, ask the questions, test, break some things, and ask people nicely to fix them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And again, if you need features, if you have issues, other things, you can just also go to the GitHub, paste them. Like as any open source project. If you are using a specific implementation and have a specific problem, then you should probably go to your implementation and ask questions or open issues there, right?
Yeah.
But a Gateway API specification, you can just go and say like, hey, I need this thing. Can you, consider that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that have already been considered, and people just need to know where to go to find that information usually. So, well, James, Ricardo, thank you so much for joining and sharing everything about what's going on with this and how it's going. Everyone in the chat, thanks for all the questions. This has been awesome. Look out for the NGINX egress party at KubeCon in March. And yeah, we will talk to everyone later. Have a great day.
Thanks, Justin. This has been fun. Bye.